This is your DBQ tutorial. So one of the other types of essays you guys are going to have to do for the AP test is going to be what's called a DBQ, or a document-based question. So a document-based question basically means you're going to get 7 primary source documents, and you have to write to a specific prompt using those documents and using the context. So we're going to use a specific prompt that was given back in 2011. It was analyze the causes and consequences of the Green Revolution. So what was the Green Revolution? Green Revolution was a technological innovation that took place back in 1945. Its founding father was a man named Norman Borlaug. What Norman Borlaug did was he started playing around with genetic modification of foods in order to try and provide a way to solve global hunger. So we're going to take a look at using this particular prompt in order to set up a DBQ. So first off is the introduction. So you probably remember that I've told you that in most of the essays that we write, I want you to get straight into the thesis. You don't have to worry what you do in your English class with a hook sentence and then context and so forth. This is going to be the one exception. In the DBQ, you are going to provide context. You're going to provide what's called contextualization. It's going to go in your introduction right before the thesis. Now, what is contextualization? Well, think for a moment if you were getting on an airplane, right? As you get onto the airplane, you're stopping at LAX, you got to go get your tickets, right? And then after that, you go through security. And after that, you sit and you wait for the plane to take off, and then you get in the plane, right? Then when you take off, as you start to go up, you can see the horizon, you can see the big picture, you see LAX, you see the Southern California coastline, you see the ocean, you're seeing the big picture. That's what contextualization is. But what I mean by this is that the big picture of the historical period we're talking about. So in this case, 1945 1990, what are the big events or themes or issues going on during the time period? And you're going to write about 2 to 3 sentences giving that context for your reader. So here's an excellent example. At the turn of the century, the global population had grown significantly due to the Industrial Revolution. There was a need for new food surpluses. The Green Revolution provided new forms of agriculture due to genetic modification of foods. Now notice what I provided here. I really haven't provided facts, but I provided big themes. The growth of global population, the Industrial Revolution, food surpluses, and genetic modification of foods. This gives the reader an overall idea about what the context was for the Green Revolution. Now after this, you're going to provide your thesis statement. And this all goes in the introductory paragraph. So 2 to 3 sentences contextualization, then right after that, 2 to 3 sentences thesis, all in the introductory paragraph. You want to answer all parts of the question, provide a clear and specific reason for your argument, and then provide a significant statement that addresses the impacts or the effects of the question. Here are some examples. So remember, our prompt is analyze the causes and consequences of the Green Revolution in the period from 1945 to the present. Here would be a poor example of a thesis. The Green Revolution led to lots of changes for the developing world that were positive. This is very vague, and it's referring to the changes. I really don't know what the changes are, but here's a really good example. Populations in the 20th century were suffering from famines and shortages in food. The Green Revolution helped to create surpluses of food. So notice what I have here, it's much more specific. I know very specifically what the cause was, famines and shortages of food. What the effect was, the Green Revolution created surpluses of food. So I've given very specific answers to all parts of the question. Now this is where things are going to get a little confusing. There's a part of the thesis point that you're going to be graded on in which you show that you can argue a consistent point throughout your essay, or where you can demonstrate that you can deal with an alternative viewpoint. So in order to do that, we're actually going to create a second introductory paragraph. So you're going to have one introduction paragraph that's going to have your context and your thesis. Then right after that, you're going to have a second introduction paragraph. It's going to go right after this, and what you're doing is you're going to say, okay, here's a possible alternative to the viewpoint that I've given in my thesis. But overall, my thesis is still more correct. I'll give you an example. Remember, our thesis so far has argued that the Green Revolution helped to solve hunger. So here's what we could do to express an alternate viewpoint. Some people would argue that the Green Revolution led to massive environmental damage to water supplies and in use of pesticides. However, the overall effects were positive on stemming global hunger, and new technologies are arising to solve the environmental problems. Now notice, your second introductory paragraph should be about 2 to 3 sentences. It does not need to be very long. And all you're doing is you're saying some people are going to argue this opposing viewpoint, but overall, here's what I really believe. And you give specific reasons for that. Now, here's a good thing about what you're doing here. There are hardly any arguments out there that are 100% wrong. What we're really doing is we're doing something called weighing. We're saying, look, there are people out there who would make some good arguments on the opposition side to my argument. But I'm going to tell you overall why my argument is still correct, and you have to give specific reasons why that's the case. Okay, now you want to go into your body paragraphs. So in your body paragraphs, you're going to do the following. You're going to provide a topic sentence with the main argument about all the documents you're going to use. You're then going to analyze the documents. And remember, we've done this a lot in class with that whole HAPPY idea. Historical context, audience, point of view, and purpose. So that's what you're doing here. You're going to be analyzing the documents using context, audience, point of view, or purpose. Now, this is where everybody gets confused, so let me just be very clear about this. You do not have to do all 4 things for every document out there. It would be really impossible to do. You wouldn't have enough time, and it would make your essay really complicated. What you do have to do is you have to use at least one of these tools for each of the documents you use. So let's just say for a moment that document 1, you want to talk about audience. Document 2, you want to talk about point of view. Document 3, you're going to talk about purpose. In document 4, you're going to go back and you're going to say, I want to talk about purpose again. Document 5, I'm going to talk about point of view. And document 6, I'm going to talk about audience. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you analyze the body paragraphs. Now you also want to provide something called outside details or context. Well, what is outside details? Outside details is a specific example from history that influenced the writing of the documents. So you're going to provide your documents. After each document, you want to provide an outside detail, and then you want to finish up the paragraph with a statement of significance for the documents. So this is like your transition, is your concluding analysis of the documents. So, like we were talking about before, we're going to be using one of the following. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you've got to analyze documents. So big quote, big capitalization here. I'm yelling at you through this tutorial. It's really important you get this, because if you don't do this, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. So let's make sure we're really clear about this. You are never going to quote or paraphrase an AP World History. Now, don't get me wrong here. Next year when you guys take AP English, you're going to be expected to quote from documents. So don't think this is true for all AP classes. But for AP World History, for AP US History, you do not quote, you do not paraphrase. You must use analysis. And what kind of analysis are you going to do? What's the one we referred to before? Context. What inspired the document to be written? Audience. Who did the author write the document to and why? Point of view. What's the author's attribution, meaning their social class? What's the purpose of their document, and then what's the significance? And last up, purpose. What role has the document played in history? So let's look at a few examples here. First off, audience examples. So here's a really bad example I wouldn't want you to use. Norman Borlaug, the founder of the Green Revolution, wrote an editorial to the public to change attitudes. Okay, not bad, but it's just not specific enough. I'm really not getting anything here about what kind of attitudes we're talking about, what he was doing to change this. Here's an excellent specific example demonstrating analysis for audience. Norman Borlaug, the founder of the Green Revolution, wrote an editorial to persuade the public that the environmental problems with his innovations were outweighed by the health benefits for the global population. Notice what's here. We've got the author. We've got the specific thing he was doing, the specific tool he was using, the editorial, that he was persuading. This is really the big word that helps here, okay, for purpose and for audience. He was attempting to persuade. Who is the audience? Persuade the public. And then a specific reason is given why he was trying to persuade the public, to make them see that there were much bigger benefits coming out of health benefits than the environmental problems. Okay, so now let's look at point of view as an example. So here's a bad example. The author of the 4th document wrote her document to criticize the environmental problems of the Green Revolution. Now notice what the problem is here. So we have it, again, remember, I'm not looking for an author's name. That really doesn't bother me. But what bothers me is that I'm not given any kind of attribution. There's nothing here about the social class or status of the author. I'm told a purpose, to criticize the environmental problems, but there's really no significance that's coming out of this. This is not very specific. Here's an excellent example. The author of the 4th example is a well-educated environmentalist from the developing world who wants to emphasize the significance of the damaging effects of the Green Revolution to often get overshadowed by the benefit of fighting world hunger. Notice what I'm given here. I'm given a social status of this author. She or he is an environmentalist from the developing world. And on top of that, I'm given the purpose. Emphasize the significance of the damaging effects of the Green Revolution. Plus the significance. It's outweighed, okay, against the benefit of fighting world hunger. So notice here, point of view, very specific stuff on attribution, purpose, and significance. So, purpose examples, and I know this gets everybody confused because you're thinking, wait, didn't we just do purpose with point of view? But remember we talked about in class, sometimes a document's purpose is different from what the author's purpose was. So here's a poor example. President Truman's purpose in document 5 was to change people's minds. Okay, at least I'm being told the author's name, I'm being told that this is about purpose, but this is really vague. It's not giving me anything specific. It's very underdeveloped. Here's a much better example. President Truman used his power as president to make a speech in order to change people's attitudes to an acceptance of new green innovations for fighting hunger. So I'm told this is President of the United States. I'm told he's writing a speech. The purpose is to change people's attitudes, and then I'm told what the attitude that he wants to change: acceptance of new green innovations for fighting hunger. Okay, so this is where you might get a little confused. Remember, we talked about contextualization. Now we're going to talk about outside details. So I know this is where things get confusing. Remember what I said about that airplane example? Contextualization was you're flying, you can see over the horizon, right? Big themes, big issues. Outside details are all those details that happen when you walk into the airport. So getting your ticket, walking through security, seeing all the people in line, getting on the airplane. Those are specific details that are going. That's an outside detail. An outside detail are specific examples that influence the writing of the document. Here's a poor example. There were a lot of environmental problems with the Green Revolution. Okay, this is really vague, very underdeveloped. I'm not being told much. It doesn't really look like you know much about the context. Here's an excellent example. The Green Revolution needed greater irrigation and pesticides to produce new surpluses of food. This led to the environmental criticism of the use of new modified techniques for growing food. Okay, notice very specific examples here, okay? Irrigation and pesticides from the 1940s to the 1990s, new surpluses of food led to an environmental criticism of the modified techniques for growing food. So this is very specific. It gives me specific reasons why these documents were written. So, just like with all the other essays, we finish up the DBQ with a synthesis. The last paragraph needs to make a connection between either a different time period or different location. So make sure that the synthesis is a core comparison between time periods or locations. It can't be peripheral. It can't be just any comparison just to get the comparison out of the way. It really has to demonstrate that you understand that there is a similarity in the argument being made here. So provide a specific reason for the comparison and then state the significance of the comparison. So let's take a look at some examples here. So here's a poor example. The Green Revolution is similar to changes in Silk Road trade for many reasons. The Green Revolution led to technological innovation, like with the Silk Road. Okay, first off, in the first sentence, we're told for many reasons it's vague, it's underdeveloped, it's referring to something. We're given a little something more in this example when it says that the Green Revolution led to technological innovations, but that really doesn't tell me much about why the technological innovations are anywhere similar to the Green Revolution. I mean, couldn't the technological innovations in the Silk Road be about camels or about how they traveled from place to place? What does that have anything to do with the Green Revolution? Here would be an excellent example. The Green Revolution compares to the Neolithic Age because both periods led to massive changes due to new agricultural innovations. In both cases, humans used technologies to develop a diversity of agricultural products, supported the growth of large populations, and this became so important because of the development of new urban centers that formed complex trading cities. So notice here, I have a really core comparison. Neolithic Age to the Green Revolution with innovations about agriculture has led to growing populations. There you go. That's a big one, right, that we've been talking about. And then that was significant because of what it did for these new urban centers in both the time period of the Green Revolution and the Neolithic Age. So this is a really core comparison. Okay, so some takeaways to finish up. The DBQ is very complicated. It's going to be one of the toughest ones that you have to do, but at the same time, you're going to find that you're going to like the DBQ the most. The reason why most students say they like the DBQ is because they're given information to work with. You're being given documents. So remember the following things about a DBQ. First of all, DBQ essays are about analyzing documents. You don't quote, you don't paraphrase. You have to analyze. Okay, you're going to be creating an argument to answer the prompt. So here's one thing to consider for that. You know, in history, there are only so many types of questions we can ask. So look to see if it's a compare or contrast or cause and effect. And then you can kind of approach the thesis statement in the way you would approach those types of essays. Remember that each body paragraph needs both documents and outside details. You got to have both. By the end of this, you're going to have to address all of the documents that you are given. And so you want to try and make sure you spread that out and you have outside details and documents in every body paragraph. And remember, last up, what history is all about. I've been making a big point about this in class over and over again. What makes history different from other types of things that we study is that it's about context. Okay, what do we mean by context? Audience, point of view, and purpose. Okay, so that's what you're doing in a DBQ, and that's what we're studying about. That's the big skill we've been trying to work on, and I can't keep emphasizing this enough. And this is what's going to make your DBQ really good: is if you analyze for context. Again, audience, point of view, purpose. Analyze for context. So, last thing to leave you with before you take off: context, context, context. Right? Don't forget that context. See you in class.